thank you for coming today and coming on time. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This is a webinar, so all the attendees are muted and their cameras turned off. We, the panelists, will also keep our cameras muted unless we're speaking, which will help minimize the background noise and also all those interruptions from barking dogs and things like that. If you have any questions to the panelists, you're welcome to ask them throughout the webinar. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will be replying to your questions at the end of the presentation, but you're welcome to type them at any time. You can also use the chat function, which is available at the bottom of your screen as well, to the right. You can use this function to communicate with other participants, with some particular people or with all participants at the same time. Ilya Miketin from the UCC office is the formal host here, so he will try to keep an eye on the chat box, and if you have any technical difficulties or logistical questions, we will try to attend to those. And now, without further ado, I'm turning it over to Andriy Savchuk to start the webinar.
There we go. Okay. Welcome to our one-hour webinar on what archiving is for and how we can help. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andriy Savchuk. I'm the co-chair, along with our other co-chair, Marina Chernyavska. Our Archives Committee was invigorated at the last UCC Congress held in Ottawa in November of 2019 to help people realize what avenues your organizations have when trying to save your, and actually our, community's history, and allow future researchers to understand who we are and who we were. This Archives Committee is a small team of volunteers that all have our expertise on what can, could, or should be done with your organization's paperwork, photos, or even digital material. Please let me introduce you to Marina Chernyavska, Irena Janjowska, Bohdan Figoy, Andriy Chernevich, and Andriy Paranchuk. The latter Andriy could not be with us today. This is our team. Over the course of this hour, we will be giving you insights, tips, and tricks, and also excellent resources on what you can do to not lose your institutional memory. When you check out ucc.ca, make sure that you also look up the committee web pages and click on the Archives Committee link. Here you will find out who we are, along with regularly updated bulletins on helpful ideas on archiving. If you have any questions, please contact us by emailing archives@ucc.ca. Again, archives@ucc.ca. Just a quick backgrounder. About 3 years ago, I was lucky enough to have the privilege of archiving or processing the almost 300 boxes of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, or committee, as it was once known. This spanned the Congress from about 1940 until the early 2000s. Papers included correspondence, news bulletins, meeting records, photographs, and so much more. 15 years earlier, the UCC, headquartered in Winnipeg, donated their materials to Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa through Ostap Skripnik, the executive director at that time. So that information on this organization could be saved. Saved meaning made available to the public for years to come and not left to degrade and deteriorate. Library and Archives Canada, as well as many other provincial, municipal, university, and even private archives, have the capacity to correctly store all sorts of material in proper dark, dry, and cool conditions that will not allow your materials to deteriorate. Where you may be storing your own organization's documents now may include a storeroom, a basement, or even garage. These are not optimal conditions to house your materials. Okay, they're actually quite bad locations. Instead of having those boxes sit in a basement or storage room, eventually to be forgotten and finally tossed, it is advisable that we all work out contingency plans for the wealth of this knowledge that can be found in all those boxes that you may have. Share that knowledge. This is what can illustrate the richness of our Ukrainian Canadian history. Also, you may know where everything is, in which box and file, since you have perhaps somewhat organized it to your skills and your liking. But is it logical for a future researcher or a future member of your organization who needs to find something from the past? That is where a finding key or a finding aid is needed. Please be aware that not everyone may be able to read the languages that the documents may be in. So when creating the finding aid, ensure that it is in English or French, depending where you are in Canada. Finding aids are vital, as without such lists, with the corresponding organized box and file numbers, you simply have a collection of papers and boxes without any rhyme or reason. Good luck in finding the Centennial Letter from 1967 that you may be looking for without a finding aid. Now just remember that there is no set way to do this and nothing is wrong or right. Basically, this is where the term, "it depends," comes into play. Each collection from any organization is unique and you all have your signature ways of doing your business. Nothing is set in stone and nothing is right or wrong, as long as it is logical and understandable when a fresh set of eyes sees your boxes and files. Do I have to organize chronologically? It depends. Do I have to organize thematically? It depends. Do I keep or chuck this out? Again, it depends. Organizing is really no small undertaking, but just remember that this COVID lockdown has really changed our lifestyles drastically, and I'm sure that we all have much more time at home, learning new hobbies or binging on some TV shows. Why not put some effort into shopping around for an appropriate archival facility that will house your organization's boxes, or start sorting your organization's documents in a sensible order? This is for your and our future, and we, our committee, is here to help. How do you think I felt when I saw my Dido Mikhailo Savchuk's signature in the first meeting that was held, the inaugural, when the Ukrainian Canadian Committee was being formed in Winnipeg in 1940? Surprised and proud that my grandfather was part of Canada's history, and now his signature and proof that he took an interest in our future is housed and safe for future viewers to see here in Ottawa at Library and Archives Canada. I hope that this introduction has given you something to think about, and you will further consider saving the knowledge that you are holding on to for those future researchers. My teammates will continue this train of thought now and further help illustrate what archives are for and how they are there for you. Again, any questions or even comments, please write to archives@ucc.ca. We are here for you. Additionally, you may ask a question or give a comment now at the end of this webinar hour. Дякую.
Thank you, Andriy. And our next presenter is Irene Dzinjowski, who will talk about archival records, history, and the future.
Thank you. The International Council on Archives, in their Declaration on Archives, adopted in 2010, states in part that archives record decisions, actions, and memories, are unique, irreplaceable heritage passed from one generation to another, are managed from creation to preserve their value and meaning, are authoritative sources of information underpinning accountable and transparent administrative actions, and play an essential role in the development of societies by safeguarding and contributing to individual and community memory. This declaration was also endorsed by UNESCO at their 36th session of the General Conference in Paris 2011. Among other things written in the declaration, there is a statement that we must consider. It states that there is a collective responsibility of all to ensure the preservation of the collective memory of archives. We can, individually and as a community, accomplish this by understanding and embracing the value of our documentary heritage, aka archives, and ensuring their preservation and making them available for research in the future. Archival records are original records created or received by a person, family, or organization, and are preserved because of their continuing or enduring value once they are no longer actively used. For example, the records may be important for their historical or legal, financial, or evidential reasons. They can be in different media or forms such as paper, photo, negatives, moving image, sound recordings, electronic, or digital. Records created today are created to document an event, people, places, and information. They record decisions made, actions taken, responsibilities of people or organizations, activities and programs and relationships. In the short term, these records are tools used to remember and understand context of decisions and actions taken. They can also act as evidence of an action taken or not taken, or decision made or not made. In the short term, as active records, they constitute operational or administrative records of an organization. They are not only valuable in the short term, but if preserved, as archival records, they provide a picture of the person or organization for the future. How else could we have celebrated so richly the 100th anniversary of Ukrainians in Canada without these documents to refer to? These records provide a glimpse of how the present has been shaped by the past and are a foundation from which the future develops. Archival records, regardless of their media, if preserved, will establish what future generations know about the individual, organization, and ultimately will provide as complete a picture of the community as the preserved records show, what they accomplished or not. If we want to give future generation an understanding of who we are as a community, what was important to us, then we should not only document today's actions and decisions, but make a conscious effort to preserve these records for the future. We should consider carefully what we are documenting today, value it, and deem it important enough to preserve for future. For example, minutes of regular meetings, annual general meeting minutes, correspondence, decisions made, programs and activities, the organization's bylaws and any amendments made subsequently over time, policy and policy changes, providing context where needed in our documentation to make sure the information is captured for the longer term. For example, preserving photos of a people and events is important. But if there is no information associated with the photo, like where and when it was taken, who took the photo, the context around the events in the photo, and who is in the photo, then in 10, 20, 30, 50 years, the photo will have not much value because the information and context associated with it was not captured. Similarly, if digital records are kept and not preserved properly, whether a hard copy is printed and kept or the digital copy is refreshed with each version change in the software, the electronic record may not end up being preserved ultimately. And this will leave a gap in the organization's history. For example, if we take minutes electronically and share these minutes electronically and no one saves a copy, we have lost that portion of a history and we leave a gap. And I can tell you that's happened to a number of organizations I know about. They've transitioned from hard copy records to electronic records and nobody is responsible for keeping them. And so then they were looking to write their history. There was a gap because nobody had those records. If we do not value the organizational records we create or receive in the course of our work and lives and do not preserve them, then what will be written about the community in the future? It may be something to consider, perhaps to designate a member of the organization to be responsible for collecting records of enduring value, making sure they are preserved, thereby also ensuring their authenticity and integrity. Think of it this way. Each person and organization in creating and then preserving their records adds a component to the bigger picture of the community and fills in areas of the history of that community. It's like an impressionist painting, and this is an example I use all the time. When you look at an impressionist painting close up, you see the small brush strokes and the small elements. But if you stand back you see the whole picture. And that's what our community archives can be. If we preserve them, if we want to provide future generations an understanding of who we are as a community, what we have accomplished, what was important to us as a community, then today's actions, decisions, activities that have been recorded should be preserved as our archival records for the long term. Thank you.
Дякую, Ірино. Our next presenter is Andriy Chernevich, who will focus on the process of donating records to public archives. Over to you, Andriy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to the webinar. My name is Andriy Chernevich, and I work at the Gold Museum and Archives in Lethbridge, Alberta. So sometimes, despite our best efforts, we're not in the position to succeed with an in-house archives. Your organization might not have a secure space to keep all the records and protect them properly from the elements. You might not even have an office. Happens very often with an organization of smaller size. You might not have funds to buy necessary supplies, such as archival boxes. And finally, you might not even have a qualified person in your organization to take care of those records and maintain archival functions. And after all, many of you run by volunteers, and you're stretched to the limit. So in this situation, what can you do? And in many cases, the best solution is to donate your records to a public archives. And this is assuming you don't have an obligation to transfer your records to your parent organization headquarters somewhere in the big city. And this decision of donating records to the public archives should, of course, be an official decision and discussed and approved at your board meeting and be reflected in the minutes. So once you made the decision, how do you know which archival institution your papers should go to? So basically, you decide. In most cases, you have a choice between a local depository and the provincial archives. And there are several factors that will help you decide which institution to choose. First, it's institutional sustainability. Second, geographical location, and also the level of interest from those institutions. Some local archives are rather small organizations. They are run by local historical society, for example, or non-profit organization. So what it means is they might not be the best choices for you because they don't have sustainable funding, and they don't have, in most cases, they don't have a dedicated facility, archival facility. So they potentially might go out of business and the future of your records will be uncertain. So that's something to keep in mind. Location is also important because your archives have because all the archives have their own geographical mandate, which means they only collect records from a certain geographical area. So the records might not come from their area, so they cannot just accept them. And second, because you want your records ideally to be close to your community and potential researchers. So this is why you might want to choose regional archives over provincial archives, because they're closer to your community and your researchers. And finally, not every archives would be equally interested in your records. Some might just straight away turn you down. And in some cases, they might not be very interested. Your records might not be their high priority. If that's the case, your donation might linger in the storage for years before it will be processed. So it's a good idea to choose an institution that is very interested in your collection and promises to process it fast. And fast, by fast, I mean in archival terms, within a year. So once you decided on the institution, it's time to donate. And an archivist in that institution will guide you through the process. But there are some general principles that you need to keep in mind. Things that you should not do. First, you're not advised to do your own selection what should and should not go to the archives, because chances are you will not do it properly. You might prioritize items such as, for example, high school diploma, while throwing away some old receipts, cookbooks, or letters. And in reality, from the historical perspective, a letter might be more valuable than your diploma. So restrain from selection and throwing things away. Offer it all to the archives and let the professionals decide what to keep. Also, please don't sort and reorganize the papers before donating. Well, first, because it's time consuming. And second, in the end, it might be counterproductive. Archives keep records in their so-called original order, which means the way documents were originally filed away naturally and in the course of day-to-day business of the organization. So that's the best way to keep them long-term. And archives don't want those records to reorganize in any other way, for example, thematically or chronologically and so on. So you're better off actually leaving those boxes the way they are before donating. And finally, don't split your collection in order to donate to several different archives. It's always better to have the whole organizational archives in one place. It's easier for researchers and it's easier for you. And if you find some more papers later on, you can donate them to the same institution later, and they will be organized in such a way that they will be added to the same phone that bears the name of your organization. And after you've done all the things, after you donated, you can relax. The public archives will take care of the processing and long-term preservation. The institution will also make sure that your organizational papers are searchable through the electronic database, and it's usually online database, and accessible to researchers. The papers will also be accessible to your organization as well. And for example, in the Gold Archives where I work, we have even special perks for people who donated records to us. So they have the privilege of photocopying and scanning all those records without charge. And with those arrangements in place, it's like having your own offsite archives that you don't pay for. Everything is taken care of. So very good arrangement, worth considering. And just for a few seconds, I'm going to show you how the archival box will look like after it goes to the archives. So it goes into asset-free box like this, and it receives a label and a number. And inside, you have file folders with documents, and they all are individually labeled. So archivists can find everything easily. And that information also goes online and searchable by researchers. So everything is preserved properly and accessible. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andri. I'm especially grateful for your comment on donating records to the same archival institution, because we all experienced it more than once when if a person decides to bring a little bit here and a little bit there, but the whole business suffers because integrity of those records is very important. Anyway, it's not my turn to speak yet. I would like to invite Andriy Savchuk back to say a few words about digital archives.
Great, thank you, Marina, and thank you, Andrea, for that. Digital or electronic archives. Right now, with technologies changing so quickly, we're in the midst of a digital archive struggle. A floppy disk, what's that? Or even a USB stick is being pushed out or even already gone and replaced by other new modes of tech. Just download it. But again, if you don't have the right app version for this, you may have a difficult time finding what you are looking for. Try downloading an MP3 in 20 years or in 5. Digital archiving is not just about digitizing documents or photographs and placing them on the web for the public to see. This process is called digitizing, and it is somewhat different from digital or electronic archives. Digitizing is turning palpable or actual paper materials or photographs into something available on the internet. But we are talking about an email or a JPEG image, bypassing the real and touchable to the real and virtual. We do not need to print them onto paper and then save them into an actual folder file. Digital archives is basically now becoming way more prominent than the traditional paper archives. You are here listening to us at this webinar. Last year, you would say, what's that? A web seminar. Because of an email that may be archived, I presume you are here also because of zoom.com. This actual webinar may become archived with the UCC collection and may perhaps be found in the computer servers in the vaults of the Library and Archives Canada in the coming years for all to hear what our team is saying today for tomorrow, and of course for all to hear around the globe. This depends whether the UCC decides to submit this into their collections as an accrual or addition to what they already have. Or perhaps once this is being broadcast, it'll be gone forever if not saved by the techies at the UCC HQ. In digital archives, files are computer files and organized with finding aids, just like the old traditional method, except you will not be opening up paper files or boxes and finding paper documents. Instead, you will just be clicking file symbols on screens to get what you want to read or see on your screen. UCC, UNF, SUSC, UCPBF, and every other group that has members who have computers are now in the new age of digital archives. We just don't know it yet. Digital archiving is truly still in its infancy, and there will be plenty of glitches to work out, but it will yield way more information and also will be much more accessible than ever before, we hope. It is important to stress the challenges of hardware and software obsolescence, and therefore challenges and risks of both preservation and access to the records. Please remember that digitization doesn't equal digital preservation. It is also important to note that digital preservation is not just about digital storage. A popular definition of digital preservation offered by the Digital Preservation Coalition is the series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. Again, I stress that digital records management is different and separate from digital archiving. We all are in the era of digital record keeping. Whether we are engaged in the business of digital archiving is a different question, and the most honest and frequent answer is no. UNESCO states that digital preservation can be seen as all those processes aimed at ensuring the continuity of digital heritage materials for as long as they are needed. This is a big deal for moving ahead. Records that are at risk of being lost, neglected, or damaged include unidentified archival materials, obsolescence of software or hardware, long-term degradation of the actual hardware, which in turn could lead to complete loss of materials. So what mitigates this problem? secure computer catalogs, and the actual material being stored in multiple locations as backup? Do we even dare talk about hacking, blackmailing through lockouts, a form of cyber terrorism, or even rewriting history or writing the incorrect or inaccurate history through menacing parallel archival websites? Which source to trust? Wow. I will stop right there, as that is a whole 1 hour plus topic to tackle. Thank you for your attention and listening to me just scratching the surface on this tech topic of our archival future. Now over to Bohdan. Take it away.
Preventative. When the Archives Committee formed after November 2019, we identified a number of initiatives that we could start almost immediately, but all the members agreed that we needed to understand the state of archiving in the Ukrainian Canadian community in 2020, both in organizations that identified themselves primarily as an archive or having an archive component as part of their program, plus what the UCC member organizations were doing to preserve their organizational history. We started by designing a simple survey. We knew all the member organizations are busy dealing with COVID-19, and that perhaps a survey in regards to archives would not be top of mind for them. Our other goals were to make it a select and click capability and make it so that an average organization could fill out the survey in 5 to 10 minutes. Of course, there were areas for additional input if a contributor wished to do so. The survey was announced by UCC National 3 months running in their electronic newsletter, and references were made to it in several email shots. Emails were sent to key contacts at 24 member organizations, 6 UCC provincial councils, and 18 UCC branches. The initial response was underwhelming. We felt that perhaps COVID-19 and the Christmas holidays, these initiata, were the reasons for this response. However, in the new year, Andriy Savchuk, Andriy Chernavich, and myself decided to divide up the list and introduce ourselves by telephone, email, and try to remind people that there was an active survey in progress and why it was important for the community. We were even prepared to do data entry to speed up the process. There was one organization that wished a printed copy of the survey mailed to them. This has now been done, and we are expecting response shortly. In the end, we had 22 organizations submit a response to date. I believe that considering the pandemic circumstances, this has been a good response. At this point, I'd like to share some of the survey highlights with you. Question: do you keep institutional archives of your organization? Most of the organizations say they keep archival records of their organization. Question: do you deposit your organizational archive into other archival repository? Only 3 organizations have submitted their archival materials to a national or provincial archive. Question: is maintaining the organizational archive written into your bylaws or statute? 9 organizations answered yes. 7 said no, while the rest were unsure. Question: what type of materials do you keep in the archive of your organization? Here they were allowed to check all that applied. A wide variety of materials are being kept depending on the nature of the organization. Things like minute meetings, financial records are being kept universally by everybody. Okay, but we have seen, okay, that people are telling us that they're keeping things like non-standard items like audio, videotapes, and other materials dealing with the history of their organizations. Question: what formats of materials do you have in your organization? Text-based materials was universal. Image-based material was very high, while audio and visual materials were being archived in approximately 50% of the organizations. Question: what is the size of your archives? The answer could be provided as, for example, linear meters or feet, number of boxes, number of items. The answers here were diverse. They ranged from 1 box to 120 plus bankers boxes, 2 filing cabinets to 24 drawer filing cabinets, 6 gigabytes of digital information to several external hard drives. And it is difficult to measure because of the pandemic. Question: what time period does your archive cover? The earliest year mentioned in the survey is 1845, with most organizations starting with when they started up and keeping records up to the present date. Where are your materials in your archive stored? This was interesting because the answers ranged from in the general space of our organization to a person's home to a USB key. Question: what difficulties do you have managing your organizational archive? The answers were far-ranging, but there was a fair bit of commonality. There was a lack of personnel, either hired or volunteer, the lack of time, a lack of space, a lack of knowledge, and especially a lack of financial resources. The Archives Committee is working on developing further resources and programs. So the question was asked, would your organization be interested in participating in the following? There was a good uptake on our suggestions: access to professional advice, educational presentations about archives and archiving, practical workshops to develop skills, information about available funding opportunities, networking with other community archivists and interested parties, which will be touched upon later in this presentation. On a personal note, while I was engaged in this project for the committee, the work enabled me to touch base with longstanding activists in the Ukrainian Canadian community, reacquaint myself with some old friends, listen to their specific stories, and to their accounts of working through COVID-19. I hope some of these stories end up in our future archives because these are truly unique times. What our participating member organizations have realized is that keeping archives is paramount because it provides evidence of the work and activities of the individuals, the leadership, and the work of the overall organization. Those materials then allow us to tell the stories of our Ukrainian Canadian community, which allows us to build and hold a sense of our identity, culture, and history. This material can even help us seek and ensure justice. George Orwell, who our community best remembers for his book Animal Farm, Kolhoz Tvarin, recognized that archives represent power. In his novel 1984, Orwell wrote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Past events, it is argued, have no objective existence, but survive only in written records and in human memories. The past is whatever the records and the memories agree upon." I sum it up in Ukrainian that archives allow us to declare and defend що ми були, ми є і ми будемо. Дякую.
Дякую, Богдан. Well, now it's my turn. I will share my screen again. Second. I'm Marina Czerniawska. I'm the archivist at the Cool Folklore Center, University of Alberta. My presentation is slightly different than my colleagues. Basically, I will be announcing a partnership between the UCC and the Cool Folklore Center on educational projects. But before we start, I would just like to summarize that what everyone said today. We try to emphasize that all of us are engaged in a business of record making. Archivists are also responsible for records keeping. We as a committee, we see it as our mission to raise awareness about the importance of both record keeping and record making and record keeping. And we hope that you learned something new today. We hope you have many questions. We already started receiving some very excellent questions. And we hope this conversation will continue, and we will all we all have a lot of work to do. So it is my pleasure to let you know that the Archives Committee will be partnering with the program of the Cool Folklore Center, which is called Sustainable Ukrainian Canadian Heritage, or SUCH for short, to offer educational workshops on various topics of archives and archiving. The first workshop we are offering on May 12th. We are still deciding on the time, but it will be online. We do hope that in the future, some of the workshops can be offered in person, which is more difficult geographically, but for certain activities, it is much more beneficial to have hands-on experience. For example, preventative conservation would be much more useful, in my opinion, than, to do in person than online. The announcement of the registration link for the first workshop will be posted shortly on the UCC website, and you're welcome to join and spread the word about this educational opportunity. Oh, 1 second. These are the topics that will be covered in the first workshop. The SUCH Network project started in 2018, and last year we did the pilot Archiving 101 workshop with the smaller audience, and we requested detailed feedback. We polished the workshop to meet the requirements, specifically requirements and needs of community organizations. So we hope it's going to be useful for everyone who attends. I'm not going to read the topics covered. You can read them on the screen. I wanted to draw your attention to this picture that I really like because it just helps everyone be humble and realize that there is always backup. There's always a lot of work to do. And I'm all caught up, said no archivist ever. This is going to be just the first workshop in a series of more in-depth topical workshops. These are some of the suggested topics, and I would ask Ilya to start a poll so that and invite participants to select those workshops that you personally would be interested in attending. We will give you just a couple of minutes for that, so please go ahead and select which topics are of interest to you, or your organization potentially, if you are not the one who is responsible for archives in your organization. But these are just some of the topics that we want to work on, and we will be inviting, we will be doing some of these ourselves, and we'll be inviting experts in particular field to do conservation, for example. Maybe let's wait another minute. You're also welcome to suggest topics that are of interest to you in the chat. We will save the chat and we'll carefully consider your suggestions in the future after this event when we work with the committee. All right, well, thank you for everyone who participated. Ilya, could you please show the results of the poll on the screen? All right. So the top 3 choices are archival arrangement and description. You definitely can't get away without it, for sure. Digital preservation, digitization, best practices. Less popular choices, but still important: preventative conservation, archival databases. And some people are still interested in copyright in archives, outreach in archives, and social media and archives. So thank you. Thank you all very much for participating. So I would like to say a few words about the such network. Educational aspect, it's, oh yeah, I was too fast. Educational aspect, it's just one of the goals of this project. I will have to stop sharing and share again my browser with you. Okay. The largest aspect of this network is the online database that is available for free to Ukrainian community organizations that house heritage collections. It is based on archival software, Canadian archival software, which supports professional archival standards, both Canadian and international standards. It is maintained here at the University of Alberta, and one important note to make: it's not a preservation database, it's an access database, archival management database, which can be used upon request by different community or Ukrainian community organizations. I would like to mention that it has a map that represents various archival institutions that house Ukrainian archival collections across the country. There are grant opportunities, there are various events, and also there is a resource page that has various links to professional standards, best practices, and this is continuously added to. There are archival supplies vendors and various useful information that can be of use to your organization. This project is supported by the Peter Arabchuk Endowment Fund. So we are very grateful to Peter Arabchuk for his generous support of this important initiative. All right. Let me stop sharing. The database that I just presented can be useful for different types of organizations. The first and the easiest example is a smaller archival institution that doesn't have their own in-house database, or a community organization that doesn't really have heritage collections per se, but they still maintain their own archive. In addition to this, this database can be useful for larger institutions that may have their own databases for access, but would still benefit from having another access point to their holdings through the database that is specifically focused on Ukrainian Canadian materials. And the third example that I wanted to share is certain special projects. And I have a few examples for you. So many of you, if not all of you, know Miron Momrek, who is an honorary member of our committee. And he has compiled and keeps adding to the list of Ukrainian Canadian family histories that either he has or he knows what institution has a copy of those. And you may or may not know that those are not very easy to find. They're not, often they're not actual publications, very often they're self-published. But in my experience and in many other people's experience, they're very valuable and they're very useful source of information. So I spoke with Meron and we agreed that it would be nice to have a catalog of those family histories on the Such network so that anyone can access them and add to them their own holdings, the family histories that they house in their institution. I received already contribution from Andriy Nahachevsky, who did his research in various Canadian archives, and he noted which Ukrainian family histories are housed where. So we hope it's going to be a useful resource. Another example for special projects, not necessarily archival collection, but a special project that is very important for Ukrainian Canadians is printer blocks from Ukrainsky Голос. You all, I'm sure, know that Ukrainsky Голос, Ukrainian Voice newspaper closed and they had to vacate the building. So those printer blocks had to be taken away. They have amazing images that were published through the years, through the over 100-year history of the newspaper. So Larissa Chelyadin is working on cataloging those printer blocks. Some of them are not in a good condition, so they have to be disposed of. Some of them are so extremely valuable that it would be good to find a home for them, but a big part of them will become part of an artistic installation. However, to catalog them, to have each image digitized, she approached me and also asked if she could have that collection in the Such network. And of course, this is a perfect fit for this kind of network. And the last example that I would like to offer is UKAMA. Many of you know that Ukrainian Canadian Archives Museum of Alberta ceased to exist just recently after many decades of being the institution for Ukrainian Canadian archives on the prairies. Well, not on the prairies, so Seredok is a separate one for Winnipeg, but all their collections were distributed to various Ukrainian museums and archives in Alberta. And we discussed at the UCC APC meetings that worked on this process that it would be nice to know where what went and where it ended up and who houses certain materials at the moment. To be honest, we already started receiving requests from researchers who used to access materials in UKAMA. They now want it again, and they're looking where to find it. So we hope that eventually every organization will be able to post their own descriptions, and they will become available to the general public online. And this is all from me at this time. We thank you all who attended. We welcome everyone to add their questions. We already have some excellent questions. We'll get to them right away. And you're welcome to email us at any time at archives@ucc.ca. Thank you. All right, so the first question is from Michael Schwetz. And my apologies if I don't pronounce someone's name correctly. I hope this one is correct. Do we, as the donating association, have any say in who will have access to the archives for research? There may be concern over the safety and preservation of the documents from the hostile entities who might destroy the documents. And who would like to take that one? I thought Irena or Andriy might be able to comment on that. Andriy, go ahead.
I can only speak on Library and Archives Canada, but what happens there is it depends on the donor, which means they have a say on what volumes or what files or whether the entire collection can be seen by the public. And then on top of that, Library and Archives does have like a security system where basically they, I shouldn't say monitor who gets to see it, but they do give a registration card. So therefore we know who the people are, contact information, email, actual address, phone number of that person, and it's verified. So therefore, researchers who are genuine. And to view the documents, it's usually, of course, now with COVID, it's much more difficult, but there are reading rooms that are set aside at 395 Wellington, which is right downtown Ottawa. So the public does have access to it. So that's on Library and Archives. I'm not sure how other archives have their security systems fit. Irena.
I just wanted to add, I mean, most archives have generally the same kind of procedure in accessing records. They have reading rooms, they have registration, and you don't get to, rip pages out or move things around. But you as a donor can place certain restrictions on the record. For example, there are time restrictions where you can say, well, nobody gets to see this stuff for 10 years or 30 years. What you cannot do, though, is say nobody gets to see it ever, because then it's counterproductive. Why bother? You do want people to see these at some point. You can also negotiate certain research conditions with the archives. The donor can work through that with the archivist. I mean, the archivist usually helps you work through this kind of thing and asks you questions. For example, privacy issues. There are issues around copyright. You might want to consider things like that. You need to think about before you donate the records. It's not a matter of here, mestizo biholvu. You need to think about the privacy issues, the copyright issues, and whether you want to restrict any kind of record for a length of time.
Thank you, Irena. The next questions are related, so I'm going to read both of them, and I can start answering, and maybe someone else would like to continue. So Anastasia Bachensky is saying, thank you for your work and dedication to our community's history. Does the UCC Archives Committee have a plan to have their own finding key for archive locations of organizations that have already donated their records to various archives across the country, like a location map of archives for each organization? And Alexander Luhove is asking, is the UCC able to provide an inventory of Ukrainian material contained in public archives across Canada? So I would like to answer twofold answer to start with. Every archival institution has a backlog and they keep processing all the materials. So even if we were able to have an inventory like that today, tomorrow it may be different, it may be bigger than that. There are several tools that already exist. So for example, there is National Archival Database that is called, one second, I'm just going to paste the link in the chat. One second. It's a consolidated database of all provincial and territorial consuls, archival consuls. The idea is that all archival institutions are institutional members of provincial councils. They have their own databases. Well, as far as I know, all provinces have their own, but all of these are consolidated into this single one-point access database. So you can type Ukrainian in it and you can see what's available where. Another source of information would be special publications. For example, the Provincial Archives of Alberta did a publication back in 2011, started by Andriy Chernevich and then continued by Irena Indrievska. And then I was revising it in 2018 that contains information about all Ukrainian holdings at the Provincial Archives of Alberta. It is available online as a PDF document free to download. And if Andriy Chernevich, if you can find it real quick, and if you can Google it and just paste the link in the chat or I can do it later. So there are different sources, but again, things are changing, things are developing. The National Archives database is kind of a bit clunky to use, but they're now coming up with new technological solutions. So hopefully soon it will be more user-friendly. There are many, many, many sources of information. We can create a resource page on the committee site to keep adding those if there is interest. And I see at least 2 questions, so there is interest. Would anyone else like to add anything to this?
Yeah, probably the easiest way to search for something right away without any special inventories is just Googling, because a lot of those databases are picked up by the Google search engine, and you can actually, if you use the exact name of the organization and just Google it, very often you can find descriptions of phone description or series descriptions from different archives that have online databases. For example, we checked a few years ago specifically if our database from the Gold Museum is reflected and searchable on Google, and it does. And so it's very useful to get on the radar of people who are not specifically looking through the archival databases like Marina just put in the chat. It's an excellent database. It's a national-wide database. It's excellent. But so some people just are not aware of that, and it's fine. Sometimes you can find a result by just Googling.
You're absolutely right. I often even Google myself, even my own database, because I know Google, it shows up in the top 5 results. It's really indexed well by Google. So yeah, that's another very good approach. Thank you, Andriy. All right, shall we move to the next question? Lesa Perid is asking, what is preventative conservation? Well, I don't know if anyone wants, or I can start. Okay, so in simple words, preventative conservation is certain actions that you take to mitigate damage or deterioration of your archival records. We all know that however well we maintain our archives, they still have the end of life because nothing is permanent. So what we do is just try to prolong their life as long as possible. And archivists always keep originals because of the evidential value that the archival records represent. So all these actions that help you know how to store your materials, how to handle your materials, all the humidity, temperature conditions, how to exhibit them, and all these kind of things. Everything, preventative conservation is something that I think everyone needs to know and do as much as they can, while conservation proper does require a specialist. You won't be able to do it on your own because there is a lot of equipment, a lot of knowledge, whole graduate degree that it takes to know what to do. And it's always better to hire a professional rather than do it on your own. But this is for the case of flooding of your records, for example. If you need to salvage them, then you need to work with a specialist, or if there is mold in your records, or things like that. But preventative is all those preventative measures that can be done. Andriy?
I would summarize it. It's something that make the records last as much as possible for a long time. And the easiest way to think about preventive conservation is just using proper archival enclosures like acid-free file folders and acid-free boxes. So just using those supplies in itself would make your paper records last longer because there is no harmful assets that would eventually speed up the deterioration of your record. So that's the easiest way to think about the preventive conservation, something that is not invasive, but you can ensure from the beginning that it will give the best chance possible to your records to last years and years.
And the box that Andriy showed earlier, the archival box and archival asset-free file folders are also an example of preventative conservation because they help offset the damage that our environment is doing to records as we speak. Thank you, Andriy. All right, the next question is from Maria Sachs. What is the difference between an archive and a research center? Who would like to take that? It depends. Go ahead, Andriy.
So basically, any proper archival facility consists of a archival storage, where all those records are kept according to preventative conservation. And so that's the back side. And the front side would be a research room plus the staff, personnel who help people find the records and navigate them, how to use them, photocopy them, and so on and so on. So back end and front end. And the research, what was the question? What is that historical center?
No, research center and archives.
Yes, a research center is not necessarily archives because it has the front end, but not necessarily it has that big storage facility behind it. I'm not sure what is meant by research center, but sometimes it might be a reference library, big reference library, which is different from archives because library consists of publications that exist in multiple copies. And archives is mostly for unique records that exist in one and several copies. So that makes archives essentially different from libraries. So if we're talking about the research reference library, that would not be exactly archives.
Thank you, Andriy. Bogdane? Yeah, I wanted to give your example, by the way. Go ahead. Please unmute yourself, Bogdan.
I'd like to answer that. I represent the Ukrainian Canadian Research and Documentation Center. The way we started and the way we continue to operate is that we choose a project. In our case, the genesis of our research, UCRDC, was Holodomor research that was started back in the early 80s with the 50th anniversary of the Holodomor coming up. And once the research started coming in, and that research did everything from paper-based to audio interviews, video interviews, information from US Senate research on it. I mean, diverse subjects. We decide, how do we get it out? It can be a book, it can be a video, it can be a movie. In that case, it ended up being one of the first movies on the Holodomor, Harvest of Despair. Then we started another project, our latest one being on Ukrainian Canadian involvement in World War II. But as we have brought in more and more information, and by the way, we have preserved all of the information on all our projects, we have made the decision that we do need to move to being an archive. So there are processes in place for us to turn ourselves from a documentation center into an archive going out. Thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan. And I wanted also to add and name your center as an example. I think the most important is not so much what's in the name, but what's your mandate. If your institution is called, well, some are called museums, even though they take care of archives. Some, well, that's a separate delicate question. Maybe I shouldn't go there. But there are many research centers that do house archival collections, that do have a mandate of their preservation and providing access to them. This is what makes them archives in mostly, I think, not so much the name. So whatever your organization is, if you have a mandate to preserve and provide access to documented to records, then you can probably call yourself an archives. Thank you all. And the last question, and we have to wrap up real soon. The last question is from Kyiv. We have greetings from Kyiv. Thank you for these informative reviews. The Such site provides a number of links to really helpful guidelines. However, maybe it would be useful to add the links to simple instructions informing about the proper description of private collections so that anyone can independently make a preliminary description of the family archive if they want to leave it in private ownership, at least temporarily. Thank you for your work and passion. I'll take this one. It won't be that easy to provide simple instructions because it's, well, for graduate students of archives, it's not 1 year of learning how to properly do archival description. This is what we are hoping to do in our workshops. So we will have a workshop dedicated to archival description, which will be helpful for both private records and institutional records. We will see how we can write them down, those instructions, and have them public. But always the first action is talk to the archivist. Whether you're a private individual or represent a family or an organization, if you want to work on preserving your archives or depositing it anywhere, please talk to an archivist. One of the most favorite answers of archivists is, it depends. And we should probably put it as our background here on the screen, because archives are unique materials. It's not, as Andriy said, libraries house published materials. Archives are all unique. You won't find them, you will find them only in one place. Therefore, their treatment is also unique in a way. So always talk to an archivist. They will always help you decide how best to proceed with preservation. Well, and thank you, everyone. Yes, Irena?
I wasn't sure whether the question about the language, whether provincial archives can read Ukrainian or understand Ukrainian came through, because I'm a Luddite. I don't technically know how to work this Zoom thing. Anyway, on just to answer, some archives do have people in as staff who can read various languages, whether it's French or Ukrainian or German or whatever. If they don't, they are interested in collecting non-English or non-French language archives, they will hire someone to work on that if they can, whether it's a special project or contract an archivist for a longer term. So there's that possibility. But if you're considering donating to an archives, you can check and see if there's someone that is available to read the language. I know that at the Provincial Archives of Alberta, when I worked there, there was me, and then there were various volunteers and contract people who did understand Ukrainian and could read it and could process the records. We also had one situation where the organization who donated their records volunteered. One person volunteered to process the records for their own organization, and therefore she learned what archives was all about, what the process was all about, and could then prepare subsequent donations before they came to the archives. So just as an answer to that question.
Oh, thank you, Irena. I almost forgot about that because it was answered in writing. This is why. Andriy wanted to add something, and I would like to after him.
Yeah, just a quick note. I don't expect, in my work, I don't expect people who donate the records to provide a description. What I usually ask from them, if it's private archives, to provide a biographical note about the person who created those papers. So it can be parents, grandparents, and usually somebody in the family have some knowledge, sometimes even in a written form. And if they send it to me, it becomes an important part of the description. So that's kind of the limits of what I expect from donors in terms of description.
But you do speak more than one language, Andri, in this case. So just to add to what Irena said, if archives don't have anyone who understands certain language, in this case Ukrainian, on staff, yes, they can hire someone else, but it's often quite easy for an archivist to arrange and describe archives, even if they don't necessarily know the language, if record keeping practices of that institution that donated their archive were good. So if you're representing an institution and your record keeping practices are good, then it's easy, quite easy, relatively easy for an archival institution to properly arrange and describe your archive. With private archives, it's always more messy and more difficult because there is people keep their records not always in a neat order or in any kind of order. It's often all just messy, packed in bankers' boxes. So in that case, it often requires actually a person with a knowledge of language, but not always. And we do live in Canada, so more and more there is English language material coming in, even from ethnic communities. All right, we should, Andri, do you want to?
I see that Michael Schwetz mentioned something, possible topics, archiving, three-dimensional objects, flags, trophies, plaques, etc. That one, again, you can say it depends. And usually archives don't like taking three-dimensional or big objects. Usually it's a documentary. And the reason is for conservation too. I mean, how can you fix something? Well, usually it's a big issue with storing it as well. So I think maybe, Miranda, you know more about this than I even, but I mean, usually archives stay away from.
I totally agree. It's more of a museum world, right. But unfortunately it has to be a topic for our next conversation.
Exactly, good.
We're out of time. Thank you all so very much for presenting, for attending, for your questions and engagement. We hope it's just the first of our meetings, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.